This week's shout out, Sodexo workers. I haven't called them out yet for the amazing job they're doing, not just cleaning up after us. Notice I didn't say you, I said us because I eat in there most days twice. But just the way they're navigating this whole COVID issue. Like I watch them walk around and wipe down tables to make sure that the next group of 6 that sit down or 2 that sit down to a table that's been properly cleaned. But I've also seen them have to walk up to some of us, reminding us as we walk around the cafeteria that we're not supposed to be walking around without a mask on. And every time I've seen that happen, number one, they've done it in a very kind way. Kudos to them. But I've also watched how we've responded to them when they've done that as well. And I just need to say, again, I think we all understand what's happening here, right? I haven't heard anybody argue. I haven't seen anybody lash out at a Sodexo worker. Now, maybe their stories would be a little different than what I've seen, but for the most part, we're cooperating. We're doing everything that we can to make sure, well, that we're here. We're in our 6th week. We're here. And kudos to everyone. But today, I just want to give a shout out to the Sodexo workers. And maybe for those of you that eat in Sodexo, which are most of us, right? You could just thank them for the way that they're helping keep us safe, for the way that they're helping keep that area cleaned up and ready for the next group that comes in to eat, because Sodexo is doing an amazing job. So Sam Cross, to you and your group, thank you for the ways that you're navigating this. It dawned on me this week that last week would have been revival. We would have been in our fall revival campaign. Now, if you don't know what revival is, it's just a series of special services that really call our attention back to our hearts, whether God has them or not, whether we've given our lives to God or not. And it's just a subtle reminder, or maybe not so subtle reminder, that that is something that God desires for us and that hopefully we long for ourselves as well. Well, it was about 5 years ago that I was sitting in a revival service, and it was a Monday morning. And I had had some breathing issues that morning, non-COVID related, but I had had some breathing issues that morning. My chest felt tight. I didn't really have numbness in my arm, which was classic, but I was having a difficult time breathing, even standing and sitting up straight. And after that revival service, I could hardly breathe. And I knew something was going on. And as I looked off to the left of the platform there in Centennial Chapel, they're standing, they're talking to Dr. J.K. Warwick, who was our evangelist for the week, our revival speaker, was Dr. Mike Pyle, who you know teaches here. And I walked up, he's also a medical doctor, so I walked up to Mike and I said, Mike, I'm having chest pains. I explained to him what was going on. He said, well, Mark, it sounds like you're having an attack of pleurisy, but I think you need to go to the hospital just to make sure. So I did. And thankfully, Dr. Pyle was right. It was what's called pleurisy. And it's basically not your heart, it's your lungs, where you develop some fluid around the lungs and it eventually goes away. And basically it's brought on by stress and you need rest. That's the only way you can recover. Well, that's not the best thing to tell a chaplain he needs during the week of revival, is you need rest. I can't say that I was a good patient that week. But eventually, the symptoms subsided and they went away. But in about a week and a half, I'll go back to see a cardiologist, because every year I go back in just to make sure that everything is okay, that my heart, the condition of my heart, is good. Now, as important as the condition of our physical heart is, it's way more important that we tend to our spiritual heart. And I think knowing that I had a checkup coming up and being reminded of what happened 5 years ago in that revival service has caused me to pause this week and to ask us a question. How's your heart? When I ask you that question, what do you think of? I'm not talking about the physical muscle that beats in your chest. I'm talking about the heart, the spiritual heartbeat that you have. How is your heart? We always deal with a tension as people seeking to live in the way of Jesus between what we believe and how we live. But I think sometimes, especially in the day and age in which we live, at least this is my observation, sometimes we can get things backwards. We can think that our faith is all determined and based on what we do. And I'm not saying what we do doesn't matter, because it does. But it's easy to get things backward because what we do doesn't really determine who we are. It's the condition of our heart that determines who we are and helps to shape then what we do. Because we all want to do things for the right reasons. We all want to be motivated for the right things. So that's the tension that we live in, right? Not just wanting to believe correctly, but to live well. It's what the church has commonly called orthodoxy, or right belief, and orthopraxy, or right living. And living in the tension of keeping those two things in balance. Jesus confronted this tension. He did it with a group that was called the Pharisees, who actually, of all the groups, Pharisees, Sadducees, Essenes, of all the groups that were around in Jesus' day, these religious sects, it's the one that he agreed with the most. He didn't disagree with much of what they believed. He aligned with a lot of their belief. Matter of fact, Jesus even said, unless your righteousness surpasses that of the Pharisees, which righteousness there means a lot of different, it can mean some different things, but it means right living. Unless your righteousness surpasses that of the Pharisees, you have no place in the kingdom. But unless you think it doesn't matter what you believe, Jesus also said in the same paragraph that he didn't come to abolish the law, but to fulfill it. Jesus' problem with the Pharisees wasn't what they believed. It's how they lived. So there's a story that John tells in chapter 3 of his gospel where a Pharisee comes to him in the middle of the night, and he's trying to reconcile the tension of belief and living. And he basically doesn't ask Jesus, what should I believe? He asks in the question, how is a man born again? What is the right way for me to live? So Jesus doesn't argue with him about belief. He confuses him a little bit because he doesn't talk about belief systems. He talks about heart change and saying you must be born again. Heart. Jesus came so our hearts would be changed to align with him so we could live in the way of Jesus, in the way that he longs us to live. Heart first, and then the way we live. It's why Matthew in the 13th chapter, again, if you're reading this chapter with me, kind of paused in the middle of it. He told a parable, and the disciples asked him why he was teaching parables, and he quoted from the Old Testament. But I want to read to you what Jesus said from the Old Testament passage. Sure, it was a messianic jingle. I've already talked about that. But I want you to also hear what Jesus says as I read it. He says, you'll listen and listen, but not understand. You will look and look, but not see. The people's hearts has gone flabby and fat. Their ears are muffled and dull. Their eyes were darkened and shut, in order that they won't see with their eyes or hear with their ears or know with their heart, or turn back again for me to restore them. Jesus is teaching that if the heart is bad, like the soil in the parable right before it, everything else is bad. He's challenging them, helping them to see there are deeper issues within us. Look, we all want to live in the right way. We all want to do the right things. In this day and age, we want to respond to the cultural moment that we find ourselves in the way that Jesus would. But what is that? What does that look like? Well, it begins with a heart change. The condition of our heart matters. Ezekiel talks about hearts of stone. You've probably heard his prayer, and when I read it to you in just a second, it'll probably sound very familiar to her. But he wrote this prayer about the nation of Israel that was navigating a very difficult time. He wasn't a contemporary necessarily of Isaiah, but he was in the line of the prophets like Isaiah was. And he's trying to help the nation of Israel again understand what the real problem is with them. It's not just what they do. It was the condition of their heart. The nation of Israel was misrepresenting who God was. And God looks at them and says, I'm going to do these things not for your sake, but to reclaim my name. But listen to the prayer of Ezekiel for them and for us. He says, I will sprinkle clean water on you, and you will be clean from all your uncleanness. And from all your idols I will cleanse you. A new heart and spirit I will put within you, and I will remove from your body the heart of stone and give you a heart of flesh. Now, did you notice who does the work there? It's not you and me. God says there are things that He will do for us. He will sprinkle clean water on us. He will replace our heart of stone with the heart of flesh. He will give us a new heart so then we can see the world that's around us. So how do we receive a new, fleshy, healthy heart? You don't go to a cardiologist like I'll go to next week. You ask. You ask God to do a work in us that, as Ezekiel just prayed, we can't do for ourselves. We need to seek forgiveness for how we have failed to live in the way of Jesus, for the way we have not only sinned against God, but the ways we have sinned against each other, asking God to take our hearts of stone and turn them into a heart of flesh. That's where the work of faith in us begins. It's what Jesus told Nicodemus. It's what Jesus was trying to communicate to the Pharisees. It's interesting in the Gospels, it's not that doctrine doesn't matter. Read Romans, read Galatians, right? These books that are immersed with doctrine. But it's interesting that some say the earliest book in the New Testament was James, and one of the last letters written were the 3 letters that John wrote. James talking about not neglecting our responsibility to widows and orphans, and John saying, look, your definition from God is set by the way you love each other. Whether you love God is determined by how you love each other. That's what John said. That's what James says. These 2 letters that bracket the New Testament, reminding us to take care of the widow and the orphan. And our love for God is defined by our love for each other. And it all begins with our heart, the condition of our heart. Is your heart tired? Is your heart weary? Is your heart hard? I understand what some of you have faced. I understand why your heart would be tired and weary. I even understand why some of your hearts would be hard, but you are not responsible, or you don't have to think that you have to rescue yourself. God can redeem and restore you if you ask. And all you have to do is ask. So how's your heart? How's your heart? Grace and peace.